Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In the last video, I introduced myself for anyone that is new that is joining the channel for the first time. And I told my personal history of how the camera has led me to where I am today. Now, in today's video, I want to do a revisit of the photography basics with you, just to go ahead and recap what we know. I know some of you are much more advanced than this, and it's okay, it's cool. If you know these things already, please simply go ahead and give the video a quick once over and a thumbs up. It always helps out the channel greatly, and I appreciate you for being here. If you want to go ahead and review with me different basics though, even some of us that are advanced photographers that have been at this for a very long time forget some of the basics, and sometimes it's helpful to go ahead and just do a real quick refresh. I'll mention really quick before we get started today that if you want to be able to go ahead and learn something that we covered today, and in more details, you're welcome to get my full courses over on coffeexcameras.com. I have all my beginner, intermediate, and advanced courses, books, on-demand classes, and everything over there. You're welcome to check it out. I appreciate it. And I also do one-on-one mentorships where I go on Zoom anywhere you are in the world and I can answer your questions directly. Now, let's get started with today's review. First up is the essence of photography. This is going to go old school for a minute. For the first part of this video today, let's review where photography actually comes from. In fact, if you did not know, the art of photography is just under 200 years old. Next year in 2025, we're actually going to officially celebrate this milestone of how far we have come since the days that photography was invented. And it was actually a quick method to replace painting and drawing and illustration back in the day technically. I think that it's important for any photographer to understand the basics because it's kind of like having tools in a toolbox. If you need to use a nail to hang a photo on your wall, for example, you obviously need a hammer. If you need to cut a piece of wood to make a frame for a photographer, basically you're going to need a saw. And photography is no different. Understanding the basics of photography and some of its inner workings are tools in your toolbox. Now, you may not use this information every single day, but trust me, one day it will come in handy. That's when you need it the most. And let me do a quick preview of what basics will be covered today. We're going to be discussing the different types of cameras, the basic parts of the camera, and I'm going to, of course, give you some different resources, tips, and tricks that you can check out after this video over on coffeexcameras.com so you can jumpstart your photography. Now, we're also going to be talking about different exposure triangle and how the camera captures a photo, along with composition, lighting, tips for successful shots, and the importance of learning post-processing and how to use it as a tool for your unique vision. So, let's dive right in and go. First things up, understanding your camera. That's a big one. In this section, we're going to discuss different types of cameras. For today, I'm going to cover the smartphone, I'm going to cover mirrorless cameras, DSLRs, SLRs, medium format, and large format cameras. Understanding that there are different types of sensors in modern cameras, but for now, let's start with the basics. All cameras are made up of a lens, the body of the camera, and have components inside on how they capture the image. When you push the shutter of the camera, it makes a picture, simple as that. The smartphone has many different makes and many different models with different lenses, resolutions, and capabilities depending on the manufacturer that you choose. However, it still captures light onto a digital sensor through the lens to make an image. And most often it's as simple as understanding how to actually tap the screen, how to expose your image, how to do it correctly, and then pushing the shutter button to capture the image. A lot of folks discard this as non-serious photography, yet I'm going to give you an important example of how good phones are these days. I once taught on Autorama TV. I was on their YouTube and I was on their Facebook channel. If you do a Google search, you'll probably find me. It showed how I made images where I photographed one with a $2,000 DSLR and I photographed more with iPhone X, side by side. Nobody is able to tell the difference between the two different shots. The point is that it's not the camera that makes the image, it's you. And most folks don't know the difference of what you capture with, simply they know how you make them feel when they see your image. The mirrorless camera is the more modern upgrade after the DSLR in the history of photography. In a DSLR, they installed a mirror that simply flips up and down to reveal the sensor beneath the mirror, whereas a mirrorless camera does not have the mirror inside, which makes it more compact and more portable to most photographers. The predecessor of both was the old SLR camera, which is called a single lens reflex camera. This camera was the DSLR's distant cousin, only it shot film instead of digital photos. Medium format and large format cameras are just like they sound. They're larger cameras that have a larger sensor inside of it that basically captures more light. What does this do, you ask? Well, the larger the sensor that you have, the more light that the camera can actually capture. Although in modern cameras, some DSLR and mirrorless cameras actually are comparable resolutions to medium format technically. And if you want, while we're going through this today, you're welcome to add my course, How to Learn Basic Photography Quickly and Easily, over on Coffee X Camera to your cart. That goes right hand in hand with what I'm teaching you today, so it's on pre-sale right now. And I go into great detail on all these different cameras even further. Next up on our agenda today is the exposure triangle. Now that we understand the different types of cameras that are out there, some of the basics at least, let's discuss how all cameras actually shoot. 4 different settings on the camera allow the camera to make an image. They are aperture, shutter speed, ISO, and white balance. For today, I'm going to actually tell you not to worry about one of these settings. Set it and forget it is what I say. And that setting particularly is white balance. Set it to automatic on your camera and forget it. Even us pros set our cameras to different automatic white balance most of the time when we're actually on the fly. If you get technical, I have other classes for that in the future. We'll talk about that in the future. And automatic white balance does a really good job of getting basics anyways. If you shoot raw files also, don't worry about it because you can always go ahead and change your colors, or you can go ahead and adjust your colors in post. Now let's review what each of these settings does with a quick overview. Aperture is the opening in the end of the lens. It allows light into the camera through a larger opening or a smaller opening. It depends on what aperture, which is also known as f-stop, that you decide to set on your camera for. Now for today, I'm going to say that if you're starting out and try your aperture for the first time, or if you're reviewing, start at f8. The reason being is that is the middle of the road. If you need more light, you can select a lower number than 8, and if you need less light, you can select a higher number above f8. Aperture also controls what is known as depth of field in photography. Depth of field is simply how much is in focus from front to back in your images. For example, a lot of people enjoy images where a subject is in focus and the background is all blurry. This is known as shallow depth of field in photography. Whereas if you're a landscape photographer, perhaps you want everything in the image from front to back to be tack sharp. This is known as large depth of field in photography. A lower F number is going to give you a shallow depth of field, whereas a higher F number gives you what's called a large depth of field. This is also known as stopping down when you select a higher F number, or it's known as opening up when you select a lower F number. Now, shutter speed is the next setting, and it's actually really important also. It's controlled by a curtain inside the camera that moves to reveal the sensor. Imagine that you have real curtains in your home. If you open them up very quickly and you close them, because maybe you see your neighbor outside and you don't want to see them today, it's going to let in less light into your house. Whereas if you open them for a very long time and you're looking outside, it's going to let in more light into your house. The shutter inside your camera works the exact same way, whereas if you open it very quickly, it's going to let in less light. And if you open it very, very slowly, it's going to let in more light. Now, the thing about the shutter speed is it also actually introduces motion, or it stops motion in the camera. So if you want it to let in motion, a slower shutter lets in more light, and it also lets in more motion. A faster shutter lets in less light, and it also freezes motion. So the faster shutter is, it just closes the curtains really quick, like I mentioned with your house, and very quickly when you see your neighbor. The third setting is ISO. This is the sensitivity of the image sensor in your camera to light. This measured in numbers just like aperture and shutter speed. If you set the ISO very low at 100, for example, that's less sensitive to light and it's also less light. This is perfect for a bright sunny day. If you set your camera's ISO to 400, it increases sensitivity and it lets more light into the camera. This is perfect, for example, for cloudy days. And if you're experiencing an indoor or nighttime scene, you generally want to increase the ISO to 800 plus, depending on how much the light that you need to make your photo. This is going to allow the camera to see better. Keep in mind though that there's also potential for what we call noise or grain when you increase your ISO very high in your camera. This is not a bad thing as some photographers might make it out to be. It's actually a creative and artistic decision. If you prefer to shoot everything at ISO 100, for example, you will need to carry around a tripod always to balance your camera. You're going to have to sacrifice something like your shutter speed to balance it, and to go ahead and get in more light into the camera with the shutter speed as well. Now, don't be afraid to experiment with ISO to get the photos that you like. Now, I'm going to point out that most cameras these days have automatic or partial settings as well. Don't be afraid to use these settings. Remember, no one knew the difference when I was at Adorama TV in my images that I shared between the iPhone and a professional camera. Now we're going to talk about composition today as well. When it comes to composition, we're also going to review some of the basics today. The first up is the rule of thirds. Imagine that you have an image that is divided into a tic-tac-toe grid. Each time that one of the lines intersects in the grid, it's actually a spot of interest for the viewers of your image for starters. And if you use just the intersecting points, think about how people actually read. For example, if your audience is based in the United States, people read left to right and top to bottom. So maybe you place a subject on the top left intersecting point to be prominently noticed first in the image. Or if you're composing for people in Russia, in Russian, people read right to left and top to bottom. So maybe you put your subject right up here where the other crosshair comes up, and everybody'd see that first in the image. So how you actually compose and who you are shooting for and what you want them to see first in the image is what it is all about. Additionally, if you use any of the lines in the grid to have your subject touch, it can lead the eyes throughout the image. Throughout the composition, or if you use each of the different smaller squares that the grid makes, you could go ahead and do minimalism in photography. For example, if you put the head in just one little box and the rest of the image is white, that would be minimalistic photography. Next up is called leading lines and symmetry. A line as it sounds, you can find them everywhere if you know how to look. The most common that I teach my students to look for is park benches or railings. These are everywhere in the world. If you put your camera really close to the left or the right of a park bench, for example, the farther end of the park bench forms a line in a perspective that leads you to a vanishing point. This is one form of many of leading lines. You could also do this with railings, tree rows, sidewalks, or anything that you find makes a line to point towards your subject. Now, symmetry, on the other hand, is when one half of the image mirrors the other. A common exercise to achieve symmetry might be to photograph a single object like a cup or a vase, for example. You'd photograph it against a neutral background. You can better center the cup or the vase and it produces symmetrical qualities with the image. You could also do this with reflections very easily as a way to go ahead and start out. Perspective is all about where you are shooting from. For example, most people in the world are around 5'6" to 6 foot tall. And the most common mistake that we all make as photographers is to simply put the camera right up to our eyes and to pull the trigger. Why? This makes a very boring photograph that all of us do, and it makes the sameness to everyone else in the world. Now, what you should do instead is to think about different ways that you can move the camera to get the different perspective or the best possible view to communicate what you see and what you want to photograph. For example, from the top, from the bottom, from the right, from the left, from the front, and from the back, at any different angle that you can think of that gives you the feel or a variety of shots to work with in post. You'll often find that one works much better than the others. Now, the other thing that's important is lighting in photography. So lighting is one of the most important parts about photography. Without it, we have nothing. As photographers, there are different kinds of light that we can experience. You can actually work with these different kinds of lights to achieve different moods and different experiences. For starters, there's natural and artificial lighting. Natural light is just that. It's light that comes from the sun or the moon. It's light that basically exists without a human intervention. Whereas artificial lighting is that which is made by humans. And when it comes to artificial lighting, some of the basics are tungsten, fluorescent, LED, and all of them have different colors and different feels for your photography. Now, when you start with the lighting, the best thing to do is to experiment a lot and see what you can create with different types of light. The way that I always teach this in my classes is to use your hand as a guide. And so if you hold out your hand, you can actually find where the direction the light's coming from, and you can also find out what color the light it is. This will give you a very, very good start to experimenting with light. Now there's also what's known as the golden hour and the blue hour photography. The golden hour is the first hour of the morning when the light comes up over the horizon line, the light's all gold. And it's also the last hour of the day before the light goes under the horizon. You'll get golden light in that way. And when the sun's below the horizon, you'll get blue light in either the morning or the night, just like that. And so a lot of photographers like this kind of style of light because it gives you a different special color that you can't reproduce too many other ways. And so it's right about an hour before the sun rises and an hour before the sun sets. And so you can get blue light or gold light that way. Some basic things to try for beginners with lighting are to use your hand, as I mentioned, to figure out all the different directions of light and also what the color of the light is. Once you know where the light is coming from, you can experiment with different ways to position whom or what you are photographing. You'll get the best feeling out of that. You want to achieve the best kind of quality of the shot. That's how to start out on there. If you want to dive into lighting in greater detail, you're also welcome to pop over to my site on coffeexcameras.com and download the How to Learn Beginner Photography Quickly and Easily course. I had video on demand over there, and I also am going to do a new email course for those of you that are very busy out there, so you're welcome to check that out. I appreciate it. Now today I also want to do some different tips for successful shots. The first up is the importance of patience and practice. Photography is just like anything worth doing in life. It takes time to learn and master your different camera settings, and time definitely requires patience. The best advice that I could share with you to achieve both is to keep a camera with you at all times everywhere that you go. And as you're learning, if you always have one with you, you can always practice your craft, even if it is only for 20 minutes on your lunch break, for example. You can test out some different quick ideas that way. The next tip is not to be afraid to experiment with different styles of photography. A lot of people start out and say that they're just one thing, that they're like a landscape photographer, a portrait photographer, or whatever they want to say that they're going to be. However, different styles outside of the ones that you're comfortable with and you fall in love with can teach you a lot for the different ones that you actually want to shoot. In 34 years now, there's not a single style of photography that I have not tried. And I can genuinely say that I can remember experiments in different styles of photography outside my wheelhouse that I was not interested in that had helped me problem solve for very large jobs that I've taken on in my professional career. It is putting the time and the experiments in that gets you comfortable with your camera, and also learning what you really like and what you really dislike. Try on all different hats and see what works best. Another big tip that I would give anyone is the importance of learning from your mistakes. Don't be too quick to delete the images that you don't like. The reason being is that you can actually look back at the images, you can review them later after you shoot, or in several years down the road, to learn from these different images. Without mistakes, there's no successes. Just like light, we need shadow to balance the light, and we need mistakes to balance our wins just the same. I still look back at images that I made 20-something years ago, and I learn from them all the time. Mistakes are the building blocks to successes, and there's no such thing as a perfect photo, by the way. There's the illusion of the perfect photo and what you want to see in this moment. Now, last but not least today, next up, I want to talk about different importances of post-processing. There's a lot of you out there as photographers that have told me that you don't like anything other than natural images. Things that you get out of your camera, straight out the camera. You think that what the camera gives you is truth, and that is never actually any type of manipulated image. While I hate to break it to y'all, but simply your camera choice has already manipulated the image. It manipulates it more than you know. The big three camera manufacturers of Sony, Canon, and Nikon have different color calibrations in their systems for starters. Just the way that the light hits the image sensor manipulates the truth. Your lens choice manipulates it, the time of day, etc. And technically, if we go old school for a moment, all photographers that shot film actually had to process their film in the darkroom. The very act of developing with different chemistry is a way to manipulate the image. Or the way that the light hit the different negative in the enlarger to print, for example, also manipulated the image. Not to mention that if you photographed in color, you could actually change the way that the colors came out by the adjustments of the CMYK on your enlarger as well. And then there's also the paper that you print on or the screen that you look at the image on. Everything makes a different perception. And just the way the light hits everything changes your perception as well. And so don't think that it's truth because it could be manipulated 50 different ways this side of Sunday. So for anybody that say there's no post-processing going on, stop lying to yourselves, please. The real deal is that you don't understand the importance of post-processing and you don't understand how to make your vision come to life just yet. But don't worry, I'm here to clear that up for you. Now, for starters, let's talk about different softwares. Everyone and their uncle knows about Photoshop and about Lightroom. So let's face it, Adobe still has a grip on the market share of editing softwares. And they're actually still the industry standard. These days, for around $10.99 a month, you can get Photoshop and you can get Lightroom on your computer too, which does not sound bad until you do the math and you figure out that it comes out to roughly about $130 a year. Maybe $130 does not sound too bad to you to pay per year for software. But let me tell you that we used to be able to buy this software on discs and we paid for it a flat fee just once. If you add up all the years that you use Photoshop and Lightroom for in the future, it comes out to way more than just buying the software outright. So today I want to tell you about a few more options in addition to Photoshop and Lightroom that you can actually get for free. So for starters, there's an app that's very similar to Photoshop called GIMP. You can actually download this for free. Yes, you heard me, it's for free. There's also free apps that are just as good as Photoshop, such as Photopea, which is an online editor very similar to Photoshop, where you can use apps like Snapseed on your cell phone if you want to get started in the mobile world for free. Now, no matter which editing suite that you want to get started with or that you choose to work in, there are some basics that you need to understand to get the best out of your images. Some of the basic adjustments are exposure, contrast, and saturation. Exposure is for the amount of light that you want to let into your image or that you want to exclude or subtract from your image. Contrast is to increase or decrease the separation of light and shadow. Now, one big mistake, I'm going to share a big pro tip right here with y'all. The most photographers out there make the mistake of increasing the contrast too much and crushing the blacks and blowing out the whites, so the highlights in the image in there. All to the point where the highlights are gone and black is just gone too. Don't use contrast for this. I prefer in my images to lower the contrast so I can go ahead and work in the curves tool or specifically target black and white in my image to push and pull the design. I push the dynamics in my images this way. You can get way better results with this simple trick. And lastly, also saturation is the amount of color that you put in an image. People make mistakes with this too by increasing the saturation too much, and you add a lot of color which could lose details, and it can make an image feel really heavy if you do too much. And if you decrease saturation all the way, you can actually take out all the color, which leaves you simply with a black and white image. Now, using all these basic adjustments sparingly for the best results is the way to go. Work on learning how to shoot in camera and how to achieve what you want first, which will save you a lot of time in post-processing. I'm going to tell you that the role of post-processing in photography is to make the image that you want to see. My friend David Allen Harvey once told me, photograph the world as you feel, not what you see. Capturing feeling is one of the most important parts about photography. You want to be able to communicate what you want to say with an image where it actually transcends language and it transcends culture. You want to use it to make the vision that you feel. Now, if you want to learn some more about this, or learn more about post-processing in particular, I'm available for one-on-one mentorship sessions online over at Coffee X Cameras as well. I can jump on Zoom with you anywhere in the world that you are these days, and we can get your tools all straight in post-processing or anything for that matter to create your vision. Now, wrapping up today on here, I want to go ahead and tell you a couple things. I want to recap for starters. Today we went over different types of cameras. We went over some exposure basics, how light works, and different tips for the best results with your photography, and also getting you started with some post-processing and great practices. Now, I want to go ahead and encourage you to experiment with what you have learned today. If this is a review, that's cool too. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Remember that mistakes are the building blocks to successes, and great photography takes time to master. I'm still a student after 34 years of doing this now, and different things that I learn every day each time I take my camera out into the world. If you enjoyed what I shared today, you're welcome to visit me over on coffeexcameras.com for more in-depth courses. I have books, challenges, and resources available for you. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell up there as well. Even if you picked up something as a reminder today, I appreciate you dropping by and doing all that stuff on there. It helps me grow this channel. Next week, we're going to dive into building a photography website. A lot of you have struggled with that too, and I'm going to be covering things that work and do not work for photographers to display their work in 2024. So don't forget to subscribe so that once you get to next week's video, I have a lot of different great resources and challenges for all levels of photographers. Got it all coming up for 2024, so stay tuned. Until next time, you're welcome to follow me here on YouTube and on other socials. Happy shooting, and I'll see you next time. Have a good one.